Welcome to Adapter's Advantage, breakthrough moments that lead to success. Our podcast brings you insider stories of the moments that mattered, turning points on the sometimes rocky road to success. Here's your host, Mark Magnacca, president and co-founder of Allego, the workforce training and readiness platform built for distributed teams.
Hi, I'm Mark Magnacca, and I want to welcome you to the next episode of the Adapter's Advantage podcast. Today, I have the good fortune of interviewing Colleen Francis, who's the founder and president of Engage Selling Solutions. To give you a little background on Colleen, she's known just for her passion about sales and results. She's been a successful sales leader for over 20 years, and she understands the challenges in selling in today's market, and in particular, I mean, in a post-pandemic world. We're going to talk about that. People comment on the fact that she's got a terrific, no-nonsense and blunt approach to solving problems and addressing opportunities, an approach that is known to deliver sales results. She's the best-selling author of popular sales books, including the recent Nonstop sales boom. She's a certified sales professional and an inductee into the Speaking Hall of Fame, and she's been recognized as one of the foremost thought leaders on the future of selling by leading publications worldwide, including being named the #1 sales influencer to follow in 2020 by LinkedIn. And I know that's true because I was notified by it, and now I'm following her. So with that, Colleen, it's great to have you here.
Thanks. I'm really happy to be here, Mark.
So, Colleen, we have so much to cover, so many interesting things I want to ask you about, but let's jump right in, just based on the biography that I provided. When people meet you and they ask you, so, Colleen, what do you do? How do you answer that question?
That's a great question. I guess I usually answer it by saying that I enable companies and salespeople to sell more effectively, more profitably, and to grow past where they thought they were capable of going. My interest is not just in helping companies grow by, adding more salespeople, right? Or adding more marketing resources. It's figuring out how to make every single person in that organization as optimally productive and profitable as they can be.
Can you talk a little bit about your journey into the world of sales, where you started and how you've ended up where you are now?
Sure. I always say I really came by this profession honestly, because I grew up in a household with a sales professional as a father. So, sales for me and my household was never a dirty word, because everything that I grew up with, every vacation I took, every dance class I went to, every piece of clothing I owned was brought to me by a sales, commission.
I love that. And obviously, it tells me a lot about your dad's communication abilities, that he was able to impart that very important lesson.
Exactly. Yeah. So and then, of course, because of that, and because of my dad, I was one of those kids that when we raised money for band camp or soccer camp or a graduation or whatever it was, I had to do that selling door to door. That this is way back in the day when parents let their kids go door to door. But I have sold everything from poinsettias to spices to wrapping paper to chocolate bars. And my dad refused to take any of that stuff to the office. And so I cut my teeth selling at an early age. And so it was natural for me to move into sales when I graduated from university. And I have a Bachelor of Arts in poli-sci and Canadian history. Thought that I was going to go into law, actually, is what I thought. But, I got into sales. I started in the insurance markets, life insurance, group and health benefits, retirement savings programs. And while I really liked the selling aspect of it, I didn't really like the the discussion around personal finances. I was not ever comfortable. Maybe I was just too young to sit around the table and talk to people about what would happen if they died or got sick. It was just not comfortable for me. And it was funny because when I transitioned into the B2B world, I had no problem sitting in front of someone talking about them spending $1 million or $100,000 without a blink of an eye. But asking somebody to personally spend $20 a month really made me nauseous.
That is such an interesting thing about sort of the know thyself. And as someone who works with a lot of financial services companies, I have a acute awareness of what you're talking about, because it's not just the conversation in that example about dying. It's also asking lots of personal questions, right? To fill out an application which is a completely different thing in B2B. And so
Yeah.
the person who might do that and then realize this isn't for me, and then they throw away sales as a career, often doesn't realize, no, wait, there's a whole other swim lane over here of a different kind of selling.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, that's where I really found my groove in sales, in that B2B world, and stayed in, you know, really started in the software business, and stayed in the software business, for a number of years before we went through some acquisitions, some, some mergers. And, you know, what I discovered, again, another learning experience about myself, is that I really loved working with growth oriented companies, you know, smaller organizations that were, just in hyper growth mode, and everybody, and I enjoyed working, you know, for companies that were privately funded, because we had to be way more creative. We didn't have 90 million, 100 million, $200 million worth of VC capital to just say, hey, do what you want. And, you know, we could hire unlimited sales and marketing resources. We had to literally build, growth based on, you know, the set of finite resources and people that we had, which creates a lot of creativity and a lot of great competition. So once I went through some of those mergers and decided I didn't like working as a cog in a big wheel,
Right.
I started, consulting on my own.
What do you say to young women, or, you know, women early in their career who ask you about how much different is it to be a woman in doing this, even in 2021, than what they might be thinking about?
Well, I think it's the best of all worlds, frankly. You know, I think for me, sales is a really great way to cut your teeth. It's a combination between being an employee and being an entrepreneur. And what I like about sales from if we just call it a gender neutrality type role, is if you're good, period,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think for young women, especially, what I really love about it is, regardless of your lifestyle choices, there's a place for you in sales. So I know, women who are driven in sales, and they're young and aggressive, and they go out and get field sales roles, and they succeed traveling all over the world. And then if they do get married and have a family and choose to not want to travel, if, you know, and even this is of course the same for men, then
Sure.
there's really high paying, you know, inside sales jobs or local sales jobs that they can take and stay in the profession and be home every night.
Right.
So, you know, it's a really great opportunity, equal opportunity. And, you know, you can make as much as you want, which I love about it, without having to take on all the risks of, say, starting your own business.
How do you learn the fluency to be able to adapt what you're doing in such a wide range of industries?
I mean, I'm the process and methodology expert, right? I'm never going to be the subject matter expert, of my clients' products. And so, even though I work with some of the most advanced type products in the world, you know, be they a fertilizer or John Deere equipment or oil and gas or technology, I don't have to know all the inner workings of that. I have to understand how to go to market with it, and how to translate what they do into client benefits. And some of that is very universal. One of the things that I noticed, about markets, the markets that I do really well in, which are a lot of commodity markets, farm, inputs, implements, oil and gas, is that they have more in common with technology than less. They're highly technical products. They're products that require long-term client relationships in order for the company to grow. Um, and they are either commoditized or on their way to being commoditized. And so being able to use those types of similarities, and just apply the same skills with some modification, is actually quite easy to do, in my mind anyway.
I was going to say, yeah, it's quite easy for you because there's a lot of people who struggle. I mean, to some extent, commoditization is happening to all of us at
Yeah.
all times, to some extent, right? But one of the things I'm intrigued about in terms of your own value proposition and the way you approach what is otherwise a crowded space is helping companies, whether they're oil and gas firms or agribusiness firms, recognize that even though the thing itself might be a commodity, there's all these other ways to create value around the
Absolutely.
commodity. So it's not like you have to just throw your hands up and say, well, there's nothing we can do. You know, oil is at $40 a barrel and that's it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. You know, the value is in the value that's perceived by the customer, and the and the value and the insights that you deliver that they take because of whether it's service or premium products or something else. What I've always believed is that if you look, act, and sound the same in your sales process than everyone else in the marketplace, then you do commoditize yourself. So my job as an expert in with multiple industry experience is to take what's working really well in one industry and figure out how to apply it to a client in another industry. So they are the first to look, act, and sound different from their competition, because even a different approach will cause people to say, oh, hey, I thought it was a huge win for a client of mine in Alberta. They transformed their sales methodology with me, and they were out in front of a customer kind of using this for the first time. And the customer, after about 20 minutes, stopped the conversation and looked up and said, what the bleep is going on here? This is unlike any conversation I've ever had with an oil guy before. You've been here 20 minutes and we haven't talked about your product.
Wow.
Like, that is a win.
Wow.
Right?
So I have to just call out, because of my special affection for Canadians, because I'm married to one, and I've spent a lot of time in Canada, and anyone who hears you say the word process, if they're from Canada or they've been to Canada, they just pick up on that little nuance. I'm curious, on that note, you mentioned Alberta, but I also know you do a lot of work in the United States and around the world. What do you find is your Canadian perspective allows you? Yeah, just using the neighbor to the south here as an example, when you're working with US based companies like a John Deere, how does being from Canada, even though you spend time in the US as well, provide you with another unique vantage point?
Well, I always have believed, it's a Buddhist saying, the monk that prays farthest from the mountain prays the best. I think that it's not so much being Canadian, it's just having an international or a global perspective, right?
Yes.
And I mean, frankly, most of the clients that I work with are global organizations. And so I think they appreciate somebody who has a global perspective of what's working, not just in that local market, and thinking the way their people think, but also understanding how people are thinking in other parts of the world and what might be driving buying decisions. So I can share with people the way our clients are buying, whether it be in France or Canada or the US or Germany or South America. I think that global perspective is really important for companies that either want to grow globally or are global.
So let's pivot to a personal pivot point for you. When you think back in your career, was there a specific moment of learning? Maybe as far back as sitting at that table talking about insurance, or something else where you said, you know what, I'm just going to change the approach that I take.
Yeah, there's been a couple. I mean, if I go way back, we can go way, way back, right? I grew up in a household where my parents were incredibly supportive of anything I wanted to do, right? And I grew up with that. You don't need to ask anyone for help. You can accomplish anything you want to. You're smart enough, strong enough, driven enough, which is a great message to be giving your kids.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
But when I first got into sales and I was struggling, I carried that with me. I don't need help. I'm smart enough to figure this out on my own. I should be able to figure this out on their own. And what I've learned subsequently is, I think it's Marshall Goldsmith, that's one of the biggest failings of the human brain, is thinking we don't need anybody's help.
Yeah.
And I was not doing well, and I got pulled into my manager's office, and he said, we got to reteach you everything you need to, do and learn in sales. And I think I was, what I've been 22, 23 at the time. And I kind of, for the first time in my life, knew well enough to shut up at that point. And he gave me a mentor. And he said, we want you to work with Fred, and Fred is going to, teach you what he does, because he's the most successful guy in the office. And so I learned then, not by my own volition, but because I was forced to, that having somebody else to be your avatar, to be your mentor, to bounce ideas off of, or just to watch. I learned about observation and saying, hey, if it's working over there, if Fred can do this, then I can do this. And that to me was a sort of a transformation, I guess, and if you talk about the adapter's advantage, right? Being able to adapt based on what I saw was working, as opposed to just what was in my head. And that's really stayed with me, I think, because I continue to do that in my own business today and with my own clients, right? You've got a problem over here. client retention problem. Hey, you know what we did with Trend Micro was fix that by doing A, B, and C. So let's apply it to your, manufacturing
Love
business,
that.
and it generally works. So
Yeah,
I haven't seen it never work, I should say.
it's that cross-pollination as you describe it. I had a conversation like this where someone asked me a similar question, Colleen, and it relates very much to what you just said. I recognized early on I didn't need to be the smartest person in the room, and frankly I usually wasn't,
Yeah,
but I was absolutely more curious than most people,
yeah,
and I was willing to ask for help. And
yeah,
so I could literally like boil, there have been so many people who've helped me because I've asked, you know? And
absolutely.
so to your point, the downside of the super supportive parental environment, which I'm fortunate to have had as well, you're right, they're sort of a sub belief can evolve in that, which is, well, I should be smart enough to figure this out. Now, look,
Yeah.
in sort of a YouTube era, you can figure a lot of stuff out, but when it comes to human relations and interpersonal dynamics like this, it's tough to find the right YouTube that can capture what Fred could show you or he could tell you after he did it.
Absolutely. And I'm a huge believer in learning by observing or learning by doing. I think you can, as a sales organization, cut your onboarding time in half. I think you can speed up success on the sales team by putting salespeople out there, new salespeople or struggling salespeople out there with top performers, and just having them watch what's happening, watch the interaction and debriefing afterwards. Because that live learning environment, that nothing else can replicate it. No books can replicate it. No videos can replicate it. In fact, I was on stage at a large sales event a couple of years ago when we still had live events. And I said, I am the only consultant in the next 3 days who is going to tell you, you do not need outside consultants or trainers to work with your team. You need, my concept is use your best to coach the rest.
Yeah.
Take what's working in the field now and those top performers and harness what they're doing on the rest of the team. Not only do you know that it works because it's working for some people, but people on sales teams are naturally competitive, and they will naturally take on what their peers do. If you and I, share an office, I'm more likely to say, well, if Mark can do it, I can do it, than, well, if that outside person who's never been in my office is telling me
100%.
to, then I should. Let's use that. I'm working on a project right now that's going on multiple years, where we're rolling out a sales methodology to a large group of distributors. Not my sales methodology. We're rolling out Challenger, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not doing the Challenger training, but I'm supporting everything around it that makes it successful. And, what's really fascinating to me is just the fact that we require people to get together on an every 2-week basis and share successes, and sort of do micro learning type events, peer learning. That's what's causing the success. Methodology, my expertise, my coaching isn't creating the success. The sales managers say, my guys are learning from each other. If you want people to adapt and change and improve, you've got to provide objective coaching advice. And you can't get that objectivity without either those analytics or some kind of ride along, because I know, and I'm sure every sales VP listening to this knows, that what your salespeople do in the field and what they think they're doing can be completely at opposite ends of the spectrum, right? You say, no, use this word or use this question. They think they're asking that in their own mind, but they're asking something completely different. Or they think they're going to, ask more questions, but they're actually dropping in product. Or they think they're giving client examples, but they're just talking. And so without that, you don't have that objectivity in the coaching, which then, doesn't make the coaching effective and actually has a negative impact on the sales rep, because they think, well, you're just saying that because you don't like me, or what do you know, you were never here.
So on that note, what do you see as the biggest opportunity that you see salespeople have in this current, I'll call it the post-pandemic environment?
Yes. Well, I think there's probably a couple, but I think it's to continue to adapt and change. I think so. Regardless of the market, there's some things that are never going back to, 2019.
Yeah, I know.
There's some things that are never going back to Q1 2020. Let's just call it that, right?
Yep.
And that is some continued adoption of this video environment, right? Which I think is really important. And what's happening here is it's not just the video environment, it's the way buyers are buying. So I think what we have to recognize is, let's say your clients are 100% back at the office and they want to see you. Okay, let's just pretend. The reality is they've spent the last year making decisions and running their business without us present,
Right.
without us, quote unquote, wasting their time, or without us being in the office, and they're used to that and they like it. And they're going to continue to keep us away because it gives them more time back. And so how do we use that to our advantage? I mean, it could be about not requiring face-to-face meetings. It could be about making sure that they have access to information. It could be about seeding the marketplace. And every market's going to be different. But we have to recognize the fact that that shift, while it was always happening, it really was accelerated. And Gartner put out a study, I can't remember if it was 2019, 2020 when it came out, but they're showing that a full 33% of all buyers in the marketplace prefer a sellerless experience. Now, that's all buyers. They did it by generation. When you look at the youngest generations of buyers in the marketplace, so, I guess would be millennial, Gen Z, that age bracket, 44% of them prefer a sellerless experience. So, I show that to my clients and I say, this is coming, right? Whether you like it or not, I have often called it the Amazonification of sales. The fact that businesses can go onto Amazon and buy thousands of dollars of equipment without talking to anybody is now informing the way they want to deal with all of their suppliers in some way. So how do you make that happen in your business? We're seeing, B2B organizations creating, online ordering apps, for example, or really ramping up their inside sales department. So one of my clients said to me, I have been trying to get my guys who are field sales reps to do more inside sales for years. And they always say, can't do it. We got to be on site to get the order. If we're not there, they forget about us. They buy from the competition. I need to have those miles on my car. And he's like, it took the pandemic and the lockdown, it's a California-based company, they were in real lockdown, to prove that they were wrong. And so I've just cut all their travel and expenses and their car allowances by 20% to force them to be in the office one day a week because they can do it.
Wow.
And think about how profitable that is, right? CEOs, VPs of sales, business owners are now looking at this going, I've just figured out how to continue to grow my business profitably by not having box seats to the football games, by cutting your entertainment budgets. And so a whole host of salespeople who want to continue to be successful have to learn to sell in that environment. And I'm really passionate about driving those kinds of efficiencies.
So I think, to your point, the buyers are really going to drive this. And that doesn't mean that we'll never have lunch together, we'll never have dinner together to get to know each other. But I absolutely agree with you. The idea of a sales leader saying that it's worth jumping on an airplane for a first discovery call. If you can't get them on Zoom for the first call, what makes you think it's going to be a productive first?
I like that question. That's a great question. And what you said there is really important to repeat. It's not like we'll never have lunch together again. The thing here is salespeople have to be more multidimensional now, right? We can't be one trick ponies. We've got phone and email and in person, but now we have to be masters of this. So I was working with a client in Texas, and we were actually having a conversation about virtual selling. And they all just were like, well, we can go out and see people. We can go out and see people. My clients want to see me. We're out fully making calls. We don't need this virtual selling stuff. Now, the timing on this couldn't have been better from my perspective, just from a sales perspective. It was right at the beginning when the storm was just hitting Texas. Things weren't bad, so we could kind of still talk about it.
Right.
But it was bad enough that these reps were being told that tomorrow they'd have to stay at home. And I said, it's not about COVID and it's not about lockdowns. Now we've got weather. So if you don't master these skills, are you going to be productive tomorrow? I need you to be in a place where you can get on the phone, get on video, and have an equally productive sales day sitting in this environment as you would in your car on the road. Because, this could just be one day. Now, it turned out to be 2 weeks for many of them, right? But you can't afford to be unproductive just because something has changed in your marketplace, weather or otherwise, right? Or the company changes approach. You have to be productive in all of these media types.
Yes, that's actually a great rationale. And as you talk about it, Colleen, it's making me realize when you do that breakdown of how many actual selling days there are, when you take out weekends, and you take out vacation, you take out national sales meet, like, and you boil it down, you realize for so many people, like there's less than 200 days of selling
Yeah.
anyway. Then you miss 2 weeks, that can have a big impact. So almost at a minimum to think in terms of I need a backup plan for when something else happens that doesn't allow me to be, because of transportation or the power not being there, whatever, that and by the way, it could be as simple as I have a generator at my house, and frankly, I can use my phone from my office that's on a cellular network that doesn't even
Yeah.
require the internet.
Yeah,
Right.
absolutely. But it is all about being able to adapt. Like I want salespeople to, regardless of this situation, geopolitical, socioeconomic, lockdowns, shutdowns, economic downturns, whatever, weather, I want them to be productive when they're working, period. And so in order to do that, they have to really embrace all of these environments. It was really fascinating working with one of my clients during all of this. And they were one of those teams who crossed their arms and said, well, we'll just wait until this is over so we can go back to normal.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So they did that. And then things started to open up in their state and they started to go out and make calls. But they sell to very large organizations, global organizations who had safety and HR and corporate policies that were set well above their pay grade in other parts of the country or other parts of the world. And so it became this, okay, well, you can come on site and sit with one person, but you have to wear PPE and you got to be 6 feet away. And all of a sudden they went, well, this is uncomfortable. You can't even read the guy's body language.
Exactly.
I need to walk the plant floor. Otherwise I can't see the equipment. I need access to all these 5 people. I'm like, well, the only way you're going to get that is on video.
Yep. Yeah, that's that's such a great point, because I mean, really, most of, I'll call it the joy, right? Which we probably didn't think of it in that way, but the joy of meeting people, of getting a tour, what, there was all of that, but it's so awkward. Let's face it, you're 6 feet apart, you have a mask on, all you can see is their eyes. It's, this becomes a really great alternative in that example. So let's pivot from that to the idea of a nonstop sales boom and your book of the same title. Who's the target for your new book, and what's the big idea from the title Nonstop Sales Boom?
The target is sales leaders and sales people. And it appeals to both in a broad range of companies and sizes. The main concept is the boom bust cycle that we often take for granted is completely manageable. It's actually self-inflicted. And that sort of hockey stick approach that many clients, just my Canadian reference, that many of my clients take, where in a quarter you've got flat revenue for month one, and then it starts to climb, and then it just shoots straight up at the end of the quarter, and then again everyone's exhausted and no one's done anything and their pipelines are dry, and so we start over again. That is a self-inflicted boom bust cycle. It doesn't need to exist. Now, I know there are some businesses and that I work with that are seasonal, right? I recognize that, especially in the agribusiness, we have seasons. But I'm not talking about that kind of seasonality. I'm talking about sort of the regular cadence of business. Generally, it's caused because salespeople are competitive and instant gratification kicks in and they're busy closing deals, and they think to themselves, oh, thank God I never have to prospect again. I never have to do that gross hard work of cold calling and meeting new people for the first time and qualification, because the floodgates are open and I can close all this business. And so they focus on closing. And once it's all closed, there's nothing to do. And it takes then multiple months to get your pipeline filled up. So the whole idea of a nonstop sales boom is managing the client engagement cycle so that you're actually working all areas of the sales cycle and paying attention to those metrics at the same time. So you never let a day go without putting new opportunities in the top end of the pipeline. You never let a day go without working phases 2, 3, 4, and 5 of the pipeline. So you've got this balance, which reduces stress, which reduces fatigue, which reduces corporate uncertainty, which improves marketing budgets.
You're absolutely right, because so much of the anxiety that exists among salespeople is that feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm on top of it right now, but I know this is short-lived. And then in many ways, the anxiety becomes fuel to sort of go out and do this hyper performance, but it's really not ideal for the human body to function that way.
I mean, physically, we could get into the physiology of it and the stress levels of it, but also practically, when a salesperson is frustrated or behind or stressed out or desperate, they make bad decisions, right?
Yeah.
When you're being beaten by saying, if you don't close this deal, then you don't have a commission check, or you don't have a job, or your family's not going to eat. If you're doing that to you emotionally, you make bad decisions, you make bad deals for you in the organization. And so you're not making the smartest, most profitable decisions for the company, and you're not making the best use of your time if you're constantly swinging through those super highs and super lows. So it's really important, from a coaching perspective. What is critical to me, as I say to sales coaches, is you need to actually focus your coaching time specifically on the front end and the back end of the pipeline, or the top end and the bottom line, the funnel, if you want to call it that, as separate and discrete conversations, because everybody falls into the trap. You get with a salesperson, you got a coaching session, tell me what's going on. Everyone only wants to talk about what's going to close. What do you got for me? What's coming in? And it's so easy to miss what's not happening at the top of the pipeline. So I like to see one session a month, a minimum 30 minutes, focused on, what's your gap, your pipeline gap, how much is needed in order to put in the pipeline, where are we going to get those leads, what's happening with opportunity creation, because ultimately you can't be successful in sales if you're not successful at front end opportunity creation.
So my last question is, based on your experience, what do you think is the most important skill that people in sales need to either learn or improve today?
Wow, that's a big question.
It is. Is there one skill, I guess, is the question.
Is it a skill or a behavior, I guess, right? Because I think the behavior, and I'm not pandering, but is adaptability, right? The behavior is some combination of creativity, adaptability, and recognizing that you have to put your customers' needs and the conversations they're having at the forefront. I really truly believe that salespeople still, and from a skill perspective, are not good at monetizing value and communicating value to their customers. But in order to do that well, you have to be curious. You have to ask questions. You have to not be afraid to ask questions around what it's costing them and what their goals are and what the biggest growth opportunities are and where they're struggling. And if you're not curious from just an operational standpoint or a business standpoint, it's impossible for you to build the right value messaging to give to your clients that's focused on them.
Right. Well, Colleen, this has been just a terrific conversation. If people want to learn more about you, or they want to pick up a copy of Nonstop Sales Boom, where should they do that?
The best place to do that is either on my website, engageselling.com, or on LinkedIn. I always say I'm probably the easiest person to find on the internet.
It doesn't hurt to be named #1 on the LinkedIn top 20, right?
But I am out there. Yeah, I'm more than happy to have people follow us on LinkedIn, or our business page on Facebook, Twitter, or of course our website, which is engageselling.com. There's a host of free resources on there that you are all welcome to.
Well, Colleen, I want to wrap up by saying that I know that there's also a number of people who are in the speaking and training world who listen to this podcast, because I get feedback from them. And I think what's really interesting, if people follow you on LinkedIn, is you represent someone who has in fact adapted in a very big way. Your embracing of LinkedIn as a platform, your LinkedIn live events, like you're doing a lot of cool stuff that, for some people, they may think, well, there's no revenue in that right off the bat. And what they miss is that, going back to your own philosophy, is you're farming, right? You're planting these seeds, and some of those seeds are what pops up, 3 months from now when one engagement ends and you're on to the next one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it is, so years and years and years ago, when I first started selling in technology, I learned a methodology that said, no free consulting. Don't give anything away for free, or you're never going to get paid. I think the complete opposite is true right now. We have to show our value and give away content, high value content for free, and not your products, obviously, but high value content. My mindset is, regardless of the industry, I want your customers, your prospects, to say, man, I am getting so much value for free from Colleen. Just imagine what would happen if I paid her.
Yeah. Well, what's really terrific, Colleen, I think one of the reasons you've, frankly done so well in the business is because you demonstrate what you're talking about. And again, the pandemic has really exposed um, people who just want to cling to the old model and hope that it will come back. And I think for all the
Yeah.
reasons you've described, it's not coming back in that way. And
No.
and why not adapt to this new way, which is, where you have an authority by demonstration that you say, look, I mean, I'm doing it myself, and people
Yeah.
are much more apt to listen and act on it. So it's been a real pleasure. Look forward to continuing the conversation, and you can be sure we'll be posting this on LinkedIn, and hope you will too.
Absolutely. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us this week on Adapters Advantage, available on all major podcast platforms. Make sure you visit our website, allego.com, where you can subscribe to our podcast so you'll never miss an episode. If you liked this show, you might want to check out our virtual training kit to learn how to keep a remote team running at full speed. Go to allego.com/virtual to download your kit today. Be sure to tune in for our next episode. And don't forget, one new idea can change your life.